The steady hum of the city seemed almost muffled by the sound of Emma's heels clicking against the slick, wet sidewalk. It was 7:40 p.m., and the moment she stepped out of her apartment building, a wave of panic washed over her. I can't be late. I can't afford to mess this up, she thought, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Her interview. The one opportunity she'd been waiting for, worked for, prayed for. All those hours spent perfecting her resume, countless nights researching the company, and the nervous energy that had kept her awake the entire week, today was supposed to be the payoff. But with every minute that passed, the possibility of her dream slipping away seemed more real. Focus, Emma. Just focus. You'll make it in time, she muttered to herself as she picked up her pace, weaving through the early evening crowds of commuters. The city felt alive, its pulse beating in the distance as people bustled in all directions. But to Emma, the noise seemed to blur into a distant roar. All that mattered now was making it to her destination, the sleek, glass building downtown. She glanced at her phone. 7:43 p.m. A bead of sweat slid down her temple. I should have left earlier. I should have. Her thoughts broke off as her heels slipped on a patch of wet pavement. She caught herself just in time, steadying herself against the cool metal of a nearby lamppost. She cursed under her breath and looked around to make sure no one had noticed her misstep. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped the rain off her jacket, frustrated at how things seemed to be slipping out of control. She had to stay calm. She had to make it. She moved quickly, dodging a puddle here, a slow-walking pedestrian there, her eyes fixed on the street ahead. It was only a few more blocks. Come on, just a little farther, she urged herself, ignoring the sting in her legs from the brisk walk. But then, as if fate itself decided to test her resolve, she saw him. A figure under the dim glow of a streetlight, standing alone on the corner of a quiet alley. His back was slightly hunched, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, the reflection of the lights making everything appear more surreal, almost like a dream. Emma was about to walk past, but something stopped her. A feeling. A strange pull she couldn't quite explain. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and despite the cool weather, he stood perfectly still as if frozen in time. He looked out of place, almost like he didn't belong in the city. She slowed her pace, just for a moment, her curiosity rising. Then, as if sensing her hesitation, he turned and met her eyes. There was something magnetic about his gaze, something that drew her in despite every instinct telling her to keep walking. His eyes were dark, but they held an intensity she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just that he was staring at her, it was the way he was looking. Through her, like he saw beyond her surface, like he could tell exactly who she was in that fleeting moment. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. "Could you help me? I think I'm lost." There it was. That voice. The words felt out of place coming from him, yet there was an undeniable sincerity behind them. Emma paused, unsure. She needed to keep moving. Her heart was already pounding in her chest, and every second felt like it was slipping away. I can't stop. I can't lose any more time, she thought, glancing back at the street where the building loomed in the distance. But then, she saw it in his eyes. The vulnerability. The silent plea for help. A sense of responsibility tugged at her chest. She couldn't just ignore him. Just tell him the directions, she thought, shaking her head. You'll be fine. You can still make it. With a soft sigh, Emma stepped toward him, her shoes splashing against the wet pavement. She stood in front of him now, close enough to notice the fine details of his appearance. He was dressed in a plain gray hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers. Nothing about his appearance screamed CEO or rich businessman. In fact, he looked like someone who had just stepped off the plane with no particular place to go, maybe even a little lost himself. "City center?" she asked, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing, trying to focus on something normal. "It's a few blocks down this road. You'll see it after you pass the park. Can't miss it." The man nodded, his expression serious. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just staring at her as if processing her words. She glanced away, uncomfortable with the prolonged silence. "What's wrong with me? Why am I still standing here?" she wondered, but she couldn't help it. Something about him, about this moment, felt important. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. "Thank you," he said, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Then, as if on impulse, he pulled something from his jacket pocket and held it out to her. Emma looked at the small card in his hand. She expected it to be a receipt or maybe just a random scrap of paper. But what he gave her was sleek, professional. It was a black business card with silver lettering. She reached for it hesitantly, and the moment her fingers brushed the surface of the card, she felt an unexpected jolt. The cold metal of the card seemed to send a spark through her hand, though she quickly brushed it off as a trick of the rain or the chill in the air. The name on the card read, Alexander Cole, CEO, Cole Enterprises. Her mind went blank for a second. No way. This has to be a joke, she thought, glancing back up at him. Why would a CEO give me his business card? But before she could say anything, the man smiled again. It was a soft, almost knowing smile. "Take care of yourself," he said quietly, his voice filled with a warmth that almost made her forget the absurdity of the moment. "Things have a way of working out, when you least expect it." He turned without another word, walking away in the direction she had pointed him toward. Emma stood frozen, holding the card in her hand, staring after him as the silence settled around her. The card felt impossibly heavy in her palm. For a moment, Emma almost forgot about the interview entirely. It wasn't the card or even the encounter that bothered her, it was the strange feeling that crept over her, the sensation that something was off, that this moment wasn't as random as it seemed. She shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts. "You're just overthinking. You've got to focus." With a deep breath, she glanced at her watch, 7:50 p.m. "I'm still going to be late," she muttered under her breath, turning back toward the street. The next few days passed in a blur. Emma barely had time to think about the strange encounter before the interview took over her focus. The following week, when her phone buzzed with an invitation for a second interview, she felt a flicker of hope. But when she saw the name on the email, Cole Enterprises, her stomach dropped. She read the email twice, then again. The interview had been rescheduled. But what caught her attention was the line at the bottom. "We look forward to seeing you at 10 a.m. tomorrow, Miss Emma Harper. Mr. Cole has personally requested your presence." She froze. "Mr. Cole? Personally requested? The same guy I helped on the street?" Her pulse quickened. No way. Emma stood in front of the towering glass building of Cole Enterprises the next morning, the weight of the card still heavy in her hand. She could hardly believe this was happening. But just as she stepped through the revolving doors, a familiar voice stopped her in her tracks. "Miss Harper, welcome. Mr. Cole will see you now." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped into the towering glass building of Cole Enterprises. The vast lobby stretched before her like something out of a dream, gleaming marble floors, contemporary artwork lining the walls, and a sweeping staircase leading up to the second floor. It was every bit as imposing as she imagined it would be, and yet, in that moment, it felt unreal. Almost suffocating. Her palms were clammy. She adjusted her blazer for the third time, trying to ignore the wave of self-doubt crashing over her. "I don't belong here. I shouldn't even be here," she thought, but the thought was quickly drowned out by the sound of her heels clicking against the polished floor. The receptionist behind the counter smiled warmly as Emma approached. "Welcome to Cole Enterprises, Miss Harper. Mr. Cole is expecting you." He's waiting in the boardroom upstairs. If you'll follow me? Emma nodded silently, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The receptionist's friendly demeanor did little to ease her anxiety. She felt out of place in her simple business attire. Surrounded by sleek, expensive furniture and the quiet hum of powerful people going about their day. As they reached the elevator, the receptionist gave Emma a polite nod before pressing the button for the 12th floor. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and Emma was left alone with her thoughts. What is happening? Her mind buzzed with questions she couldn't answer. Alexander Cole. The man she had met on the street, the one who had given her his card, now seemed to be part of her reality in a way that didn't make sense. She glanced down at the card in her hand again. His name was printed clearly, but the more she looked at it, the less it felt real. Is this some kind of test, she wondered, trying to piece together the fragments of what had happened that night. Why had he seemed so insistent on giving her the card? Why had he asked for her help, of all people? And now, this, an invitation to interview for a job with a company she knew little about, from a CEO she had just met by chance. The elevator pinged softly, and the doors slid open. Emma stepped out, her stomach tightening. The boardroom was just ahead, its glass doors reflecting her nervous face. As she approached, she caught sight of a tall figure standing by the window, looking out over the city. It was Alexander Cole. She recognized him immediately, his broad shoulders outlined against the view of the city skyline, the dimming light of the evening casting long shadows across his face. He was wearing a sharp, tailored suit, the kind that seemed to demand respect. But there was something different about him now, something more polished, more commanding than the man she had met on the street. The moment she stepped into the room, he turned, his eyes landing on her with that same intensity that made her heart flutter. "Miss Harper, thank you for coming." His voice was calm, controlled, as if he had been waiting for her for hours, but his eyes, those dark, searching eyes, didn't leave hers. "Please, sit down." Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of his gaze, like it was pulling her deeper into something she wasn't ready for. She nodded and sat in the chair across from him, trying to steady her breathing. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, trying to sound professional despite the way her voice trembled. "I wasn't expecting this." Her words trailed off as she realized how ridiculous it sounded. How could she have expected anything? This entire situation had turned her world upside down. Alexander smiled, though it wasn't a smile that reached his eyes. It was calculated, measured. "I can imagine," he said, leaning forward slightly. "It must be unexpected, to say the least. But I'm glad you came." He paused, studying her for a long moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the edge of the desk. Emma had no idea how to respond. The silence between them stretched on, making her feel even more exposed, as if he could read every single thought in her head. "What did you think of our company?" he asked finally, breaking the tension. His question was casual, but there was something about it that felt deliberate. I think it's impressive," Emma said, trying to focus. "I've read a lot about Cole Enterprises. The work you do, the innovation. It's amazing, really." Alexander nodded, his gaze never leaving her. "You've done your homework, I can see that. But that's not why you're here, is it?" Emma blinked. "What do you mean? You didn't come here just to admire the company, Miss Harper." His voice lowered, taking on a new edge. "You came because something about our meeting caught your attention." Emma's pulse raced. She wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but it was clear she wasn't prepared for what he was about to say. "Do you believe in fate, Emma?" Alexander asked, his voice almost a whisper now. Her mouth went dry. She wasn't sure what to say. "Fate?" "Yes, fate," he repeated, leaning back in his chair. "I find that life has a way of pulling people together at the strangest times. In the most unlikely places." His eyes softened, and for a brief second, Emma saw something different in them, something genuine, almost vulnerable. But the moment passed quickly, and his gaze turned hard again. You helped me the other night, when you didn't have to. You didn't know who I was. And yet, you took the time. Why? His question hung in the air, and Emma found herself at a loss for words. I don't know, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I couldn't walk past you. You looked like you needed help. She shifted in her chair, trying to look him in the eye. I guess I just wanted to do something good for someone. I don't know if it was fate, though. Alexander studied her closely, as though weighing her every word. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. You didn't know who I was. And yet you helped me, he repeated, his voice tinged with something darker now. I admire that. Most people would have walked away. But you didn't. You chose to help, to give someone a moment of kindness when you didn't have to. Do you know what that says about you, Emma? Emma swallowed hard. I don't know. It says that you're someone who understands the value of connection, he said, his voice growing colder. That's why I've invited you here today. To offer you a chance, an opportunity that most people would kill for. A chill ran down Emma's spine. She didn't understand. A chance, she repeated. What do you mean? Cole Enterprises has a position open. A high-level position. I believe you're more than capable of filling it. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. I want you to be part of something bigger, Emma. Something that will change your life. Emma blinked, her mind struggling to process his words. A high-level position? This was insane. She had no experience in the corporate world, no connections. She shook her head. I'm not sure what you mean. I don't have the skills or experience to work here. Not yet, he interrupted, his tone firm. But you will. Under my guidance, you'll learn everything you need to know. I'm offering you a chance to prove yourself. You'll rise faster than you could ever imagine. Her breath caught in her throat. Why me? She blurted, unable to stop herself. Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me. Alexander's smile was small but knowing. I know enough. I've seen enough. He stood up suddenly, walking around the desk toward her. But I'll leave the decision to you. You can choose to walk away. Or you can choose to take a leap. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another card, this one thicker, more substantial. He placed it gently on the table in front of her. This is your future, he said softly. What will you do with it? Emma's hand hovered over the card, her heart hammering in her chest. This was no ordinary offer. What do I do? She thought, her mind reeling. What if I say yes? What if I say no? The card sat there, waiting. And with it, the answer to a question she hadn't even known she needed to ask. Emma stared at the card in front of her, the gold-embossed letters gleaming under the harsh lights of the boardroom. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to touch it, her mind racing. She didn't know what she expected, some grand revelation, a moment of clarity, but instead, her world felt even more uncertain than before. What do I do? The question circled in her mind, like a song on repeat. She glanced up at Alexander, who was still standing, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, waiting for her answer. His quiet intensity was almost suffocating, and for the first time, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of pressure, as if the weight of this moment could crush her. She blinked, trying to steady her breathing. This is crazy, she thought. She had barely known him a day, and yet here she was, sitting in front of the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, holding a golden opportunity in her hands, an opportunity that seemed almost too good to be true. But why her? Why had he chosen her? She wasn't qualified. She wasn't special. She was just Emma Harper, an ordinary woman who had stumbled into his path at the right time. It's all a coincidence, she told herself. But deep down, something told her it was more than that. Much more. Take your time, Alexander said softly, breaking the silence that had stretched on for what felt like an eternity. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a quiet urgency. He knew she was struggling, and he wasn't going to rush her. But neither would he let her walk away without a decision. Emma's mind raced. She could leave. Walk out of this building and never look back. Walk away from this bizarre encounter, pretend like none of it had ever happened. She could go home, return to her normal life. To the small apartment, the small job, the unremarkable routine. It would be easy. Safe. But what if she didn't? What if she took a chance? What if this was her moment? The one she would look back on years from now and say, that was the day everything changed. She wasn't sure what she was getting into, but she had a feeling, one she couldn't explain, that this wasn't just some ordinary job offer. This was the chance of a lifetime. The kind of chance that came once in a lifetime. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her insides. What exactly is it that you want me to do? Alexander smiled, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite place. You'll be working closely with me, he said, slowly, emphasizing each word. You'll be learning the ropes of the company, yes, but more importantly, you'll be involved in something far greater. You'll be helping shape the future of this company. The future of the world, even. Emma felt her heart skip a beat. Shaping the future, she repeated, unsure if she understood correctly. That's a bit much, don't you think? Alexander shrugged nonchalantly. You'll see in time. He stepped toward her, closer than before, and for a moment, Emma could feel the air around her thickening with tension. It won't be easy, Emma. It'll be demanding. But if you have the right mindset, if you're willing to push yourself, there's no limit to what you can achieve here. She looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the sharp suit, the commanding presence, there was a quiet intensity that she couldn't ignore. It wasn't arrogance, it was something else. A kind of certainty. Alexander Cole wasn't a man who wasted time. He was someone who knew exactly what he wanted and wasn't afraid to take it. And right now, he was offering her a place by his side in that vision. But why me? She asked, the question escaping her before she could stop it. She was tired of dancing around the obvious. I'm not qualified. I don't even know what I'm doing here. He smiled again, but this time it was softer, almost reassuring. That's exactly why you're perfect for the job. You're fresh. You haven't been jaded by the system. You have the kind of drive that can't be trained. You see things differently than most people. Emma felt a wave of doubt wash over her. Or maybe I'm just naive. But she kept that thought to herself. What would it entail? She asked, her voice steadier now. It's simple, really, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. You'll start with a few smaller projects, nothing too overwhelming. But over time, you'll become more involved. More integral. He paused for a moment. You'll have access to everything, people, resources, knowledge that most people would die to have. And you'll use that to help the company grow, to help me grow. Emma could hardly believe what she was hearing. The offer was too good to refuse, but there was still a part of her that hesitated. I'm not sure, she admitted. This is all happening so fast. I don't even know you. True, he said. You don't. But we have time, Emma. I'm not going anywhere. His gaze softened, but there was an underlying edge to his words. And neither are you. She swallowed hard, her mind spinning in circles. I could just walk away, she thought again. I could walk out that door and forget this whole thing. But something inside her, a voice she couldn't ignore, told her to stay. You may never get another chance like this. This is bigger than you. Bigger than everything you've known. Finally, she placed her hand on the card, the cool metal of the surface grounding her. She looked up at Alexander and nodded. I'll do it. Alexander's eyes sparkled with approval, a slight but unmistakable smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Good choice, Emma. I knew you'd make the right one. She stood up, her legs slightly wobbly, and extended her hand. Where do we start? Alexander shook her hand firmly, his grip strong, almost too strong. Welcome aboard. Later that evening, Emma sat on the subway, her thoughts spinning. The reality of what had just happened was still sinking in, and she felt like she was on the edge of something huge. Her heart was racing, but not from fear. No, it was something else, excitement, anticipation. What have I gotten myself into? She looked down at her phone, the screen lighting up with a text message from her best friend, Lily. Lily, are you okay? You didn't come home after the interview. What's going on? Emma sighed, glancing out the window of the train as the city lights blurred by. I'm not sure I am okay, she thought. She typed back, I'll explain soon. Something happened. It's big. She hit send and sat back in her seat, her fingers still gripping the card tightly. Her life had just changed in a way she couldn't comprehend. She had no idea where this road would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't mind the uncertainty. As the train rumbled on, Emma felt a sudden sense of foreboding. Is this the right choice, she wondered. She couldn't shake the feeling that Alexander's invitation was just the beginning of something much bigger, and much darker, than she could ever imagine. Emma's first day at Cole Enterprises was nothing like she had expected. She had walked into the sleek, modern headquarters with wide eyes, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The building was a fortress of glass and steel, towering above the city like a silent sentinel. Every step she took felt surreal, as if she were walking in someone else's shoes. Alexander had given her a tour of the office, a quick walk through a maze of pristine glass walls, minimalist decor, and high-tech gadgets. She could barely keep up with the constant flow of information he was tossing her way. He was efficient, laser-focused, and didn't waste time on small talk. Emma quickly realized that she had entered a world that was unlike anything she had known. But what stood out most was the air of secrecy that hung over everything. There was something about the place, about the people, that made her feel like an outsider. She hadn't yet been introduced to many of the other employees, but from the few she had met, there was an odd sense of detachment. Everyone was polite, but distant, their smiles stiff as if they were hiding something. Emma couldn't quite put her finger on it, but it felt as though the entire company operated on a different set of rules. The most unsettling part, however, was the way Alexander had looked at her during the tour. His eyes seemed to pierce through her, analyzing, assessing. He had asked her questions, but they were never casual. He wanted to know her thoughts, her motivations, what drove her. Every answer she gave felt like it was being weighed, measured. As the day went on, Emma started to feel like she was walking in a fog, unsure of what was real and what was merely a facade. But she had made her decision, hadn't she? She had chosen to take the plunge, and now there was no turning back. The next day, Alexander summoned her to his office. She hesitated outside the door, her mind racing. The sleek glass door was solid, almost impenetrable, and yet she had this strange urge to knock. She had no idea why. She had been in plenty of corporate offices before, but this felt different. More intimate, more personal. After a brief moment of hesitation, she knocked. The door swung open almost immediately, as though it had been waiting for her. "Come in, Emma," Alexander's voice called from within. He was already seated behind a massive, dark wood desk, his eyes focused on the screen in front of him. "Close the door behind you." She did as he instructed, walking across the room to the chair in front of his desk. The space was immaculate, no clutter, no unnecessary items. Just the essentials. It felt like walking into a command center, not an office. Alexander's presence filled the room, even though he wasn't physically imposing. It was the way he held himself, calm, confident, in control. "I hope you had a good evening," he said, looking up at her for the first time since she entered. His gaze was piercing, as usual, but there was something different in his expression today. Something more calculating. "It was fine," Emma replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She had no idea what he wanted from her, but it felt like this meeting wasn't just about small talk. "Good," he said with a nod. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly. "Let's talk about what's next." Emma felt a wave of anticipation. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready. "What do you mean?" He folded his hands on the desk, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've signed on, Emma. You're part of the team now. But it's time for you to prove that you're not just here because of some stroke of luck. I don't waste time on people who can't keep up. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, trying to push down the unease that had settled in her stomach. "I understand." "Good," he said, his lips curling into a small smile. "I want you to take on a project. A big one. It'll be your first real test here." Emma felt a jolt of excitement, mixed with a twinge of fear. "What kind of project?" He glanced down at the papers in front of him, shuffling them briefly before looking back at her. "There's a new initiative we're rolling out. It's top secret for now. No one knows about it, not even the people who work for us. You'll be working directly with me on it." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Top secret?" "This sounds serious," she said, unsure of how to respond. "It is," Alexander said, his tone serious. "I wouldn't trust just anyone with this. But I'm trusting you. I need someone who's not afraid to think outside the box. Someone who isn't afraid to take risks." The weight of his words hung in the air. "What exactly will I be doing?" "There's a client. A very important client. They have a project they want us to take on. It's something unusual. Something that could change everything. I need you to research the client, understand their needs, and figure out how we can meet them. But here's the catch, Emma, I don't want you to just follow orders. I want you to challenge me. Challenge the company. Find the hidden truths, the secrets." Emma stared at him, confusion flooding her mind. "I don't. I know you don't know the full story yet," he interrupted. "But you'll learn soon enough. I'll be in touch with you directly. Do not share this information with anyone, not even your colleagues. This project stays between you and me." A chill ran down her spine. Something about this felt wrong. Something about this was starting to feel like she was being pulled deeper into a game, one she didn't fully understand. "I'll do my best," Emma said, her voice tight with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "Good," he replied, giving her a single nod. "I'll be expecting results. Let's see what you're really made of, Emma." As she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something far darker and more dangerous than she had anticipated. Alexander's words echoed in her mind, "Find the hidden truths. Challenge the company." But what truths? And what kind of company was she dealing with? That evening, back at her apartment, Emma sat in front of her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She was supposed to research the client, but she couldn't concentrate. The more she thought about the project, the more her instincts screamed at her to back away, to forget this whole thing. But she couldn't. She had already crossed the line, and there was no turning back now. The client was shrouded in secrecy. Even the company's internal database had minimal information about them, which only deepened the mystery. She found a few scattered articles, vague references to their involvement in global markets, rumors of illegal activities, but nothing concrete. As she dug deeper, the feeling of unease intensified. There was something unsettling about the way Alexander had spoken about the project. She could sense the urgency in his tone, the quiet intensity in his eyes. Whatever this was, it was bigger than anything she had imagined. And she was about to get in way over her head. As Emma sat back, staring at the screen, she noticed something odd. An encrypted email had arrived in her inbox, no subject, no sender. It was a simple line of text, "They are watching you." Her breath caught in her throat. Who was watching her? And why? Emma's mind raced as she stared at the cryptic message in her inbox. The words seemed to blur on the screen, her pulse pounding in her ears. They are watching you. The simplicity of the sentence, the absence of a sender or any other identifying information, sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't the first time she'd felt like someone was watching her since starting this job at Cole Enterprises. But now, the sensation was undeniable. She clicked open the email. The message was encrypted, just a series of numbers and symbols, and there was no way she could make sense of it. A sense of dread settled in her chest. Who would send her something like this? And more importantly, why? She glanced over her shoulder, making sure her apartment door was locked. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing second. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she debated what to do next. Should she call Alexander? But the thought of involving him, of letting him know she had received this unsettling message, made her hesitate. What if he was part of whatever was happening? What if this was all some elaborate game? Emma pushed the thought aside and reached for her phone. She needed answers, not just from Alexander, but from someone outside of the company. Someone who could help her make sense of the situation. She tapped her best friend, Rachel's number, and waited for the call to connect. It rang once, twice. Then the familiar voice picked up. "Hey, Emma. What's up?" Emma's voice trembled as she spoke. "Rachel, I need your help. Something's going on here, and I'm scared." Rachel's tone shifted immediately. "What do you mean? What's going on?" "I'm working on this project with Alexander Cole at Cole Enterprises. It's bigger than I thought. There are secrets, things I don't understand. And now I just got this weird email." Emma paused, unsure if she should reveal everything to Rachel. But she needed someone to know. "It says, they are watching you." A heavy silence followed. "Emma, that sounds creepy. Are you sure it's not some prank? Maybe one of the people at the office?" Emma shook her head, even though Rachel couldn't see it. "No. This isn't a joke. Something's happening, and I'm starting to think I'm in way over my head." Rachel's voice softened. "Okay, listen, maybe you should take a step back. Talk to Alexander. Get more details about what's really going on with this project." But Emma wasn't so sure. Something about Alexander's demeanor, the way he'd spoken to her with such coldness, his insistence on secrecy, it all felt wrong. "I don't know, Rach. I feel like I can't trust him completely. I don't think he's telling me everything." "Then you need to trust your instincts," Rachel said firmly. "If something feels off, it probably is. But you need to be careful. If you think people are watching you, you need to be extra cautious." "I'm serious, Emma. This is not something to take lightly." Emma nodded, though she knew Rachel couldn't see her. "I'll be careful. I don't know what to do, but I'll figure it out." After hanging up, Emma sat in the silence of her apartment, the unsettling message still looming in her mind. She had been in this position before, feeling helpless, but now, she was trapped in a situation where she couldn't simply walk away. The project was already under her skin. Alexander had made it clear that her success depended on proving herself, and she wasn't one to back down from a challenge. But this? This felt different. This wasn't just about work. It was personal now. It was about survival. The next morning, Emma woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She groggily reached for it, her fingers brushing against the screen. The notification was from Alexander, "We need to meet now." She glanced at the time. It was early, earlier than she usually woke up. But she knew better than to keep him waiting. She quickly got dressed, the weight of the email and the night's anxiety still gnawing at her thoughts. Was this meeting just about work, or was there more to it? By the time she arrived at the office, the building was already buzzing with activity. People moved in and out of conference rooms, phones rang incessantly, and the elevator doors opened with a soft whoosh as more employees poured into the lobby. The whole place felt like a machine, efficient, but somehow lifeless. She entered the elevator with a few others, but no one acknowledged her. She couldn't help but feel isolated, even as the world around her hummed with energy. When she reached Alexander's office, he was already waiting for her, standing by the large windows that overlooked the city. His back was to her, but she could tell by the way he stood that he was deep in thought. "Good morning, Emma," he said, his voice smooth and calm as he turned around to face her. "Good morning," she replied, trying to sound composed despite the swirling thoughts in her head. Alexander gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat." Emma sat down, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. She didn't know what he wanted, but she could feel the weight of the moment. Something was coming. Something big. "I trust you've had time to think about the project," he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "I have," Emma said, trying to steady her nerves. "I've been doing some research, but there's not much information on the client. It's almost as if they don't want anyone to know anything about them." Alexander's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Good. That's exactly what I want. I didn't hire you to do things the conventional way. I need someone who can dig deeper, who can uncover what's hidden." Emma leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What exactly are we dealing with here, Alexander? You keep talking about secrets, about things that need to be uncovered. But what are we really after?" Alexander paused for a moment, his gaze never leaving hers. "What we're after, Emma, is power. Influence. Control. This client is part of a network of people, wealthy, influential people, who control more than just the markets. They control the very fabric of society. But the truth is, we don't know the full extent of their reach yet. That's where you come in." Emma's heart raced. She hadn't expected anything like this. "Are you telling me we're working with people who manipulate society?" Alexander's eyes gleamed with something darker. "I'm telling you that we're working with people who have the ability to shape the world as we know it. But what they want in return is something far more valuable than money." Emma's mind spun. She hadn't signed up for anything like this. Her instincts screamed at her to walk away, but something deeper inside her kept her rooted to the spot. "What exactly do they want from us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They want a partnership," he said, leaning forward. "But not just any partnership. They want you to be the bridge, the one who connects the dots, who uncovers the missing pieces. Only then will we be able to leverage this power and change everything." Later that day, as Emma left Alexander's office, her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. It was something far bigger, far more dangerous. And now, Emma was a part of it, whether she liked it or not. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on, something even darker than what Alexander had let on. And as the shadows in the city grew longer that evening, Emma realized that whatever she had gotten herself into, there was no way out. As Emma left the office, a man in a dark suit approached her. He didn't look familiar, but there was something unsettling about the way he watched her from across the lobby. His eyes locked onto hers, and for For a brief moment, Emma felt as though he could see straight through her. Then, he disappeared into the crowd, as if he'd never been there at all. Who was he? And why did she feel like he had been following her all along? Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something fundamental about the entire situation. As she walked away from Cole Enterprises, the eerie encounter with the man in the dark suit haunted her thoughts. Who was he? What did he want from her? And why had he been watching her? Every step felt heavier, like the weight of the world was pressing down on her chest. The air outside was crisp, but it did nothing to ease the knot in her stomach. For the first time since she'd begun working with Alexander, she felt truly trapped. The constant surveillance, the cryptic emails, and now this strange man who seemed to be following her, it was all becoming too much. But Emma knew one thing for certain. She couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything she'd uncovered. She had to find out the truth, no matter what it took. That night, Emma sat at her desk in her small apartment, the city lights outside her window casting long shadows on the walls. She stared at her phone, the messages from Alexander still fresh in her mind. It was clear that he was playing a dangerous game, but what was his end goal? The project seemed too big to just be about money, it had to be something more. Something far more dangerous. Her phone buzzed again. She checked the screen. Meet me tonight. Midnight. Same place as before. The message was short, but it carried an intensity that made Emma's heart race. She couldn't tell if he was offering a clue or if he was trying to draw her into something darker. But she couldn't afford to ignore it. This was her chance to confront him, to finally get answers. She grabbed her coat and made her way out the door, locking it behind her. The night air hit her face as she stepped onto the empty street, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. As she walked toward the designated meeting place, a small cafe tucked away on a side street, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her instincts told her that she wasn't alone, that someone was following her. Every step she took, she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see that same man in the dark suit lurking behind her. But the street was empty. Silent. When Emma arrived at the cafe, she spotted Alexander sitting at a table near the back. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were intense as they locked onto hers. He had been waiting. Emma, he said softly as she approached. I'm glad you came. She sat down across from him, the tension in the air almost palpable. I don't know what's going on, Alexander, she said, her voice low. But I need answers. I've been digging into this project, and everything about it feels wrong. Who are these people we're working with? What do they really want from us? Alexander didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. You've already begun to figure it out, he said, his eyes narrowing. I knew it wouldn't take you long to catch on. Emma's pulse quickened. What do you mean? The people we're working with, they're not just business partners, Alexander continued, his tone dark. They're part of a powerful, secretive organization. An organization that has been pulling the strings behind the scenes for centuries. They control governments, corporations, entire industries. But what they want, what they really want, is something much more valuable than money. Emma swallowed hard. What do they want? Alexander's expression shifted, and for the first time, Emma saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes, fear. They want control. Total control. And they're willing to do anything to get it. Emma's mind reeled as the weight of his words sank in. She had known something wasn't right, but this? This was beyond anything she had imagined. She had thought the project was about business, about making money, but now she realized that it was far more sinister than she had ever anticipated. And you're a part of this? She asked, her voice trembling. You're working with them? Alexander looked away, his jaw clenched. I didn't have a choice. None of us did. For the first time, Emma felt a pang of sympathy for him. He had been trapped in this world, just like she was now. But that didn't excuse the things he had been involved in. He was still a part of this organization. He was still hiding something from her. You're not telling me everything, Emma said, her voice firm. What is it they want from me? Alexander's eyes flickered with something, regret, fear, maybe even guilt. They want you to be their eyes and ears. They want you to find what they've been looking for. The missing piece that will give them complete control over everything. Emma's heart skipped a beat. What missing piece? The artifact, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The one you've been researching. The one that holds the key to everything. It's not just a relic, it's a weapon. And it's been hidden for centuries. Emma's mind raced. The artifact. She had heard whispers of it before, but she hadn't realized how important it was until now. What does it do? She asked, her voice barely more than a breath. Alexander's face was grim. It has the power to manipulate minds, to control thoughts. Whoever possesses it can control the will of nations, of entire populations. It's the most powerful weapon in the world, and the organization has been searching for it for years. That's why they've chosen you, Emma. You're the key. Emma's world spun. The artifact. Mind control. This was no longer just about a job or a mysterious client. This was about power, power on a scale she could never have imagined. He leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. And you want me to help you find it? Alexander's gaze softened. No. I don't want you to help me. I want you to stay away from it. I want you to leave all of this behind. Emma's eyes narrowed. And why would I do that? After everything I've learned, how can I trust you? I'm not asking you to trust me, he replied quietly. I'm asking you to trust yourself. You're stronger than you realize, Emma. Don't let them control you. The turning point. As the minutes passed, Emma's mind raced. She had thought she understood what was going on, but now, everything had changed. She was no longer just a bystander in this twisted game. She was a player, a pawn, and possibly the most important piece in the entire puzzle. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it. The message was brief. Get out of there. Now. It was from Rachel. Before she could react, the door to the cafe opened with a sharp bang, and in stepped the man in the dark suit. The same man who had been following her for days. His eyes locked onto hers immediately, his expression cold and unblinking. He wasn't here to deliver good news.